Hello everyone, and welcome back to World of Warships Blitz with Terry. Quite a little while ago I have made a video about Jesse Oldendorf on California, who is an epic commander from the US tree and has the APCS Plus skill. And one part of footage that I've actually been recording has been made into a short because I managed to get a couple of citadels in a row on a Bismarck, which seems to have surprised people. So, we'll watch the video first and then I'll take this opportunity to explain how armor-piercing mechanics work in the game and how this works in general and why this happened. So let's begin just by looking at the footage of me fighting the Bismarck. We've cleared out some of the bots, and there's the Bismarck at 8 kilometers. I have the forward guns ready, so as you can see, I'm manually aiming to make sure the shells go where I want them to go. First salvo, not too spectacular. We get a full pen and 2 semi-pens for 3 hits in total. Now I'm going to get the rear guns on target as well. Shots out, and unfortunately at this point I'm already looking around, but as you can see, there's the first citadel, 5 hits, 1 citadel, and now I'm slightly distracted with the shores here, and obviously with the destroyer over there, but in a minute I will be getting back, and then we'll be shooting at the Bismarck again. Interestingly enough, I'm only getting semi-pens on the shores, so things happen. There we go, that's better. Full penetrations on the shores, no citadel unfortunately. Another shot out, but now the shores is behind the island and the Bismarck's coming back around. So, okay, Mr. Bismarck, you want to brawl? Let's go for it. I've got a full broadside Belfast to shoot at, but you know what, Bismarck, let's go. Aiming again at the deck here with manual aim, and first salvo out, that wasn't bad. 2 bounces, but 3 full penetrations. Second salvo out, and there's the citadel. Bismarck is at this point on fire, and my guns are almost reloaded. So again, targeting deck here, slightly in front of the superstructure to account for his moving forward. And there's the next citadel, and that is a dead Bismarck. So let's begin by understanding the mechanics that we're dealing with here. We'll start out with the guns. Now, a lot of this information is based on older data mining things and is based on experience and bits and bobs that we got out of update notes. But generally, what we know is that if we look at the APCS Plus skill, it improves 2 things. Now, in Oldendorf's case, he improves the max penetration by 7.5% and the penetration power sustainability by 15%. What does that mean? We don't know the exact max penetration values for each ship. We do, however, know that the initial penetration, so when the shell leaves the barrel, is a value that's in the game. And we know that because it has been mentioned in one of the patch notes where Yamato has been updated and the initial penetration has been increased from 496 to 506. So we know that Yamato's 18.1-inch guns have a 506, presumably millimeter penetration. We don't have the data mined value from the California, however, we do have the values from the New Mexico, which for all intents and purposes has the same gun, so we can take that as a lead. Now these are 356mm guns, which are smaller than Yamato's obviously, so she's not going to have a 500mm initial penetration. But if we are assuming a 300-odd-millimeter initial penetration, then that tells us something. Now the other thing we know from the captain skill is that the armor-piercing shell penetration is reduced over time. So the longer the shell is in the air, so the further away the target is, the less penetration power the shell has at the time when it actually hits the armor. And we do know the values of Bismarck's armor. If we're looking that up on the CIC website, Bismarck has a belt armor of 320mm, she's got a deck armor of 110mm, and bow and stern armor of 32mm. Now, in order to score a citadel on the Bismarck, you have to hit the center hitbox, ideally on the deck, because the deck is about 30% armor of the belt, and the belt is 3 times as thick as the deck. So if we're considering maybe like a linear projection of the initial penetration, I would say, you know what, probably the 356mm guns on the California have an initial penetration of about-ish 350mm. And then we're adding Oldendorf's increase of the maximum penetration, so it's a 7.5% extra on that, which isn't a huge amount. And then we add the flight time. Now, we don't know by how much the shell penetration gets reduced, but we can be relatively certain that with a 320 millimeter belt and a 300 odd millimeter initial penetration, even with APCS Plus, at the time the shell hits the belt, it is going to be significantly less than 300 millimeter, and we're going to get a bounce or at best a semi-pen. However, if we are hitting the deck plating of the Bismarck, which only has 110 millimeter armor, then it is reasonable to assume that we are going to get a full penetration, and a full penetration is a requirement in order for the citadel roll to happen. So looking again at the New Mexico's guns, we can see that New Mexico's guns have a citadel chance of 11%. What that means is that every time you manage to get a full penetration on the central hitbox, so either on the belt, which is unlikely because the belt is relatively thick, so unless you really point blank range, or on a battleship, or on the deck armor, because the deck armor on the battleship is about as thick as the belt armor on a cruiser. So if you are hitting the deck armor, you have a much better chance of getting a full penetration, and for each full penetration you get, there is a presumably 11% chance that you're getting a citadel, in which case you are doing 250% damage from the initial alpha damage, minus the obvious damage reduction and everything else. The Bismarck is a bit of a special case, because the Bismarck is a German battleship, and German battleships, not battle cruisers presumably, but battleships, starting with the Gneisenau at tier 7, have a special mechanic. So I like calling it the turtleback mechanic, just because of the whole PC PC equivalent, but technically it's just a second penetration check. So if you manage to get through the deck armor, in this case, for full penetration, on the Bismarck there's a second check to see if you still have, against an internal armor that we don't know the exact value of, and to see if you still have enough penetration to get through that as well, with a much reduced penetration value. So you effectively have to manage full penetration twice on a Bismarck. So getting through the belt armor of a Bismarck is going to be almost impossible. Getting through the deck armor, however, is a completely different topic altogether. So if we're looking at the first salvo with the forward turrets here that I managed to get off, and it's relatively difficult to see, but there are 6 shells that are coming on target, and two of the right grouping and the one out almost on the left side are going to hit. The other ones are hitting the water lines, and the shell out left is hitting the belt near the rear turret. And from the forward 2 shells, one is hitting the belt and one is managing to hit the superstructure from the top, so effectively a deck penetration. So we see three hit values. We see 625 and we see 1251. So 625 is a semi-pen for 50% damage, and the 1251 is a full penetration for full damage minus the Bismarck's damage reduction. So for the two 625s, we would not get a roll for the citadel chance. For the 1251, we do get a roll, but it's an 11% chance on that particular hit to see if we manage to hit the citadel. It's a little bit easier to see on the final grouping because we have two distinct groups of shells. We have got 3 shells that are about to impact around the second turret in the rear, and we've got 3 shells that are heading towards the central superstructure here and are about to impact there. So if we're looking on where these shells are hitting, because at this point I'm actually zoomed in, we see that in the rear, one of the shells is splashing in the water, the other 2 are about to hit the X turret, or around about the X turret. Now, the hitbox for citadel hits is between the first turret and the last turret. So effectively from the front of the first turret to the back of the last turret, that whole section is where you can score citadels. Everything beyond the forward of the first of the A turret or behind the Z turret is going to be bow and stern section, where we have significantly less armor plating. So any hits there with battleship caliber shells were going to overpenetrate. And these sections cannot score citadel hits. They are interesting for cruisers with much lower caliber guns, which cannot penetrate the deck armor of a Bismarck, for example. For them, so for a 128 or 450 millimeter gun, armor piercing, they would be targeting the bow and stern section because they can very much penetrate 32 millimeters of armor. But for battleship shells, we want to hit the deck plating, not the belt, because we already know that at least with these shells, we're going to have a tough time getting through the belt. And if we're looking where the shells are impacting and seeing where the explosions are happening, it's a little difficult to tell, but we see that we managed to get 5 hits in total. So 1 shell splashed next to the rear turret, 1 shell penetrated the deck, or 2 shells penetrated the deck, and 1 of them got the citadel. So for 1 shell, we had enough penetration to get through left over, because we're firing at 6.62 kilometers here. We had enough penetration left over to get through the 110 millimeter deck plating, and then we hit the 11% citadel chance roll. And then we still had enough penetration left to get to the second check. Whereas from the forward grouping, we got 3 shells on target. 2 of them hit the superstructure again for full penetration, and 1 of them hit the deck plate, hit the belt again for a semi-pen of 631, and that was it. That's how you score the citadel. So generally, rule of thumb. It can help to understand your target's armor, but you don't need to know the exact value. A general good rule of thumb is that it is difficult to impossible to punch through most battleships' belt armor. With pretty much anything. You're much better off aiming for the deck plating, and this is where the manual aim comes in. As you can see, I have the little toggle button to disable the lock-on, and the manual aim makes sure that the shells go where I tell them to, rather than because the lock-on has the tendency to draw the shells down towards the center of the ship, thanks to Sly 47's research, and that oftentimes means that the shells are hitting the belt where they are not going to be penetrating. And if you're not getting a full penetration, you're not getting a citadel chance. And that's also why the APCS skill is so powerful, especially on large caliber shells, because it gives you a better chance to get these full penetrations, especially if it's a bit on the edge. With the penetration check at the impact at the deck plating, if you don't have enough and you get semi-pens, you're not getting citadels. So you do need the full penetrations on the central hitbox on a battleship to make that happen. If you're firing battleship caliber against other targets like cruisers, it doesn't matter as much. If you are firing cruiser caliber or lower at battleships, you're most likely not going to get the citadels. There are exceptions. There are very powerful cruisers that can very much citadel battleship, but most of the time you are better off with armor piercing to target bow and stern to get the, especially 450 millimeter and under, to get the the full damage rather than the bounces. But yeah, this is how I managed to get 3 citadels and 3 salvos on the Bismarck, and to sink the Bismarck, thanks to Jesse Oldendorf on the California, despite the fact that the California only has 350 millimeter guns. The other reason obviously is the distance, because I'm relatively close to the Bismarck. If I had done this at 10 kilometers, the chance of doing it would have probably been reduced, because the shells would have been flying for longer and would have had less penetration left at the time they hit the ship. So, and it's much harder at long ranges to reliably hit the deck armor. Your shells go everywhere. So this whole manual aim business really mostly makes sense at close range engagements, where you can make sure that your shells hit the deck for a maximum number of full penetrations and a maximum chance to hit with the citadel. Anyway, that's it for me today. Thanks everybody, and I will see you next time. Bye bye.